Welcome to today's reading group conversation, which we titled Slicing, Blackboxing, and Queer Cutting, where we thought we could try through the reading of two texts to talk with you about the politics of bioimaging, automation, and 3D computation. We strongly invite you to participate in this conversation. We truly would like you to be part of this, and we know that this kind of offline, online setting is not ideal or comes with its challenges. So we thought, please, if you have a question, then please put a plus in the chat, so we know also the right order of to address the people to ask the question, or if that is more comfortable for you, you could also put the question in the chat, and specifically Flora will make sure or pay extra attention that none of you or none of your questions will be overlooked.
Yeah, and if you feel, oh, but even Flora has overlooked me, just, make some noise, help each other out, because we would really like everybody to be able to have a voice.
Yes. Maybe a quick notion of how we thought to structure today's event. So first we would like to have a short introduction round where we would like to invite you to not only share your name and your pronouns, but also think of a term that triggered or that stuck with you while reading the two texts, or alternatively also like terms from the announcement that maybe stuck with you or triggered you. We will gather these terms also as a kind of vocabulary for the conversation we would like to have with you. Afterwards, we will shortly introduce the three writers and their text. We really want to keep this brief, but just to get everyone on board. And then we thought to structure the discussion around four themes we considered very fruitful in this constellation. We first would like to talk about de-blackboxing. Then we would like to talk about the futures of biomedical imaging and the urgencies for queer cuts. Afterwards, we thought it would be interesting to talk about what we call the 4 Ps of uncertainty, so the predictive, the potential, the probable, and the possible. And last not least, doing and writing research. We want to conclude with the invitation again to everyone to comment or add or pick up on a term from the initial vocabulary list. Flora will collect these terms in the chat, but we will also have a pad where we collect these terms, but also references or potential extra additional reading. So we will give you, of course, access to this pad with the invitation to maybe also add or comment, etc. So this pad will also be accessible afterwards.
And you can also access it now if you want.
Yeah, that's also true. Maybe you share then the link. Flora will also be our timekeeper, as we thought both texts are so rich, and it would be good to give different topics also the place and time to discuss this. If there's any question or remark already, that would be the moment. Otherwise, we would start maybe with a short introduction round. Yeah. So please let us know about your name and your pronouns, and share with us this term that did stuck or triggered you while reading the two texts, or alternatively the announcement.
Do you maybe want to go first, like as an example?
I can also do this, yeah.
Yeah.
So my name is Antje Günther. I go by she, her, and my term would be modern slice.
My name is Flora Liesen. I go by she, her, and one term I was specifically interested in was predictability.
My name is Femke Snelting. I use she, her, and the term I wanted to pick up is improbable.
So maybe Jara or Sylvia next, if that's possible.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sylvia Cassini. I go by she, her, and the term I'd like to pick up is imagination is a technical thing. Locution instead of a term.
Hello, my name is Jara Recha, and with this difficulty of like translating the importance of pronouns, I, I use they, but also ella. And I chose the term precision medicine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I unfortunately don't see the name on the screen that I'm looking at, so maybe just, unmute yourself and share with us what you want to share.
Maybe Ren, you want to follow from this? Just
I can also nominate someone after me. Maybe that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Ren.
That's
I use they them pronouns, and I think denaturalization would be my term.
Denaturalization.
Denaturalization. And I would pass to Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz. I use the term she, her. I haven't read the texts because I only knew about the event yesterday. So I've just like scanned really fast and picked something out, which is the fiction of medicine. Oh, I need to nominate. Goda?
I got a she, her, and the term, I don't know, there were so many good terms. I was just stuck with a subjectivity cut and don't know, was just thinking about it now. I can pass on to Julio.
Or maybe, yeah.
Or Julio's not there, maybe Sigmund?
Otherwise, I can go.
Yes.
I'm Callum. I use he, him. And the thing that stuck with me was digital cuts as naturalized, scientifically objective gestures.
You picked a whole book.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No,
It's
it's
the concept behind it, I guess, rather than the phrase. Yeah. Because then if you take one of those phrases out of it, it like becomes a different thing in and of itself. Yeah. And then it'd be cut. I don't know.
Thanks.
Someone else wants to share, or otherwise?
Shall I paste them in the chat?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And if you see that I made a mistake, you can also correct me in the pad.
And maybe Flora, would you be then so kind to introduce Sylvia Cassini and her text to us? That would be great.
So my name is Flora Liesen. I'm a postdoc here at Maastricht University. I'm interested in imaging, I'm interested in visualizations, in art science, and I encountered Sylvia Cassini's work already some time ago, so I'm really excited that she agreed to be here with us virtually to discuss her new book that came out last year, some pieces of which have been published at other places before, but it's really nice to have it all together in this one book. Sylvia Cassini is a senior lecturer in film and visual culture at the University of Aberdeen. And her work is situated at the crossroads of visual culture, medical humanities, which she's working on also right now, and science and technology studies. And the book, I mean, the chapter that you read is from this new book, Giving Bodies Back to Data, Image Makers, Bricolage, and their Reinvention in Magnetic Resonance Technology. And it's part of the MIT Press Leonardo book series with a specific interest also in art and science. And in the book, Sylvia examines what she calls the bodily situated aspects of data visualization work, zooming in on visualization practices around 2 MRI technologies developed at the University of Aberdeen. And what is really interesting is that in the book, she combines, can you see me while I'm speaking, actually? Yeah?
Yes.
She combines a number of different theoretical frameworks and methods. And you can see this happening in the chapter that we read for today. So she weaves together ideas from philosophy of science, for example, on data as relational and contextual. But she also weaves those together with ideas from historical epistemology. So she has references to the idea of mechanical objectivity, related to image making, for example, but also she uses STS concepts such as boundary objects and epistemic things. And with these tools, Sylvia Cassini examines, as she states, how scientific knowledge is produced rather than innocently discovered, which is akin to looking under data visualization to consider its assumptions and conventions. And I like this image of looking under data visualizations. And what I think is special about Sylvia's approach in her book and also in her other publications is the way she not only draws on critical conceptual approaches, but also combines methods from, for example, laboratory ethnography. So being a present and embodied observer of scientific practices, and we see this also in the chapter, we see the interview elements there, the data from her interaction with scientific practitioners. But she combines this also with archival research into histories of image making. So she delves into the history of this first MRI image of a mouse with a broken neck in 1974. And she uses her collaborations with artists as a form of research. And I think it's really nice that Liz Orton is also here in the audience. It's one of the main examples in the book, and one of the main interlocutors also for this way of working. So there, I think, Sylvia Cassini is almost like a type of curator, researcher, actively connecting artists to specific scientific spaces and projects to examine how, through such interactions, in her words, she says, well, in those interactions between artists and scientists, the black box can be passed back and forth, which I thought was an interesting way of phrasing it. And maybe this black box can be rearranged in such a way that a shared ground is created. One can create and support such transactions by enabling a trading zone between the 2 epistemic cultures of art and science. So these are interesting methods and approaches that she has in her work, and specifically in this book, that we all see coming together in this chapter. And I'm very happy that you're here to discuss this with us, Sylvia. Very good to have you.
Thank you so much.
So it will be now my great pleasure to introduce to you Femke and Gara. Gara, I up until now only knew through their writing and their research project that they conducted together with Femke. So I'm very happy that finally I'm also gonna at least see you on screen. Gara calls themselves an interdependent researcher artist, which I found very interesting. They conduct various disobedient action research in various collaborations, and I definitely want to pick up on that term later on in the discussion. And one of these disobedient action research is then the volumetric regimes project. This project emerged from a collaborative project, or from the collaborative project Possible Bodies, that was initiated together with Femke around 2016. And it started actually with, the question was emerging, what is actually going on with 3D? And then from there it unfolded and very interesting ways to explore so-called bodies as concrete, but at the same time very complex and fictional entities in this whole context of 3D computation. And biomedical imaging is then one chapter in this. Femke, in line with her research and field of interest, I would say, does not describe herself as something she is, but what she's doing with whom. So I met Femke first time in Brussels when in the context of APAS, Constant, and Enough Room for Space. Femke is also supervising me. I originally wrote she's my supervisor, but I have to say she's supervising me, next to Flora and Haro is also present in the audience, on my practice-based PhD journey. Femke has and continues to develop projects at the intersection of design, feminism, and free software. And one of her newest endeavors is the Institute for Technology in the Public Interest that she runs together with 4 other researchers. And if I would have known how to pronounce their names, I would have
Clever.
Just shortly, but like Hara's and Femke's text, invasive imagination and its agential cuts that we want to discuss with you today will be part of their forthcoming publication, Volumetric Regimes. And in this text, this text follows like the slice, or what I would then call they call the modern slice, the software slicer, and slicing as a way to add to the missing conversation, or the conversation they think it's missing on the politics of computer tomography. Where in this whole discussion, an interesting point is then how MRI biomedical imaging might actually not be as non-invasive as it is generally considered or advertised as. So maybe now, I would like to open up the conversation and start with the first chapter or first block, themed block, which we called About De-Blackboxing. And I want to maybe just give a short introduction, or not introduction, give some quotes or why I thought this, or why we thought this topic is interesting when reading these both texts. So Sylvia, you were very clear in your book about the necessity to open up the black box in science and technology in general, but also then specifically in bioimaging. So you wrote, for example, and I'm quoting here, reopening the black box enables a better grasp of how data are made rather than given to us. I emphasize the reopening of the black boxed scientific process in several ways. First, when a controversy arises, the assumptions made up to that point must be re-examined. Second, a black box can be reopened by looking at the early stages of development of a technology, for example, before the data visualization protocols became standardized. And third, artists can open a black box by challenging the assumptions made in the laboratory or inventing in any given pipeline within the laboratory to examine what is inside the box. So, and I have the feeling in your book, but also specifically in this article we want to discuss, you're following these 3 options of de-blackboxing. For Femke and Hara, I mean, you're not using directly this term, black box or de-blackboxing, but I actually have the feeling that is exactly what you are doing or how you would approach this. So I wanted to ask you both if you could give an insight of how you approached biomedical imaging as this black box, and how you did or did not try to de-blackbox it, and where you maybe also see the urgencies or the necessities to do so.
Femke, do you want to start, or shall I go first?
Maybe Sylvia, you go first.
Okay. So I guess that, well, for me, the idea of engaging with black boxing, with the concept of the black box, became a necessity once I started my fieldwork in the biomedical physics laboratory, because I realized that you know, to some extent had to move beyond and away the kind of the visual output produced by either MRI or by this new type of MRI technology called fast phase cycling MRI. And I realized that the two ways I had of really trying to open this black box were really related to carrying out laboratory field work, but also carrying out archival research. For me, I would say that opening the black box of a biomedical imaging technology is much easier when a technology is under development, because I realized that this is why in the book, I'm interested in the early stages of the kind of the two poles of the experimental trajectory of MRI innovation in Aberdeen, MRI development in Aberdeen, the kind of first phase in early 1970s, and then the current ongoing phase with the development of fast phase cycling. And I think it is in the early phases that is easier perhaps to kind of explore all the assumptions, conventions that are normally black boxed. Once the visual output, for instance, the image is stabilized and is carried out there in the world outside the laboratory. So that was my attempt. I must say that when I read the book of my colleagues, I realized that they had a very interesting way of showing how researchers and artists who work at the crossroad of critical theory and also artistic practice can actually literally open the black box by envisaging a series of actions. So, and I think perhaps that this is where I stopped. I stopped before that. Also, if you want, and I'm saying that very explicitly, for a lack of, if you want, technical abilities, as you correctly said before in the presentation, Flora, I'm not an artist myself. I acted, I'm a researcher, and I've curated some art science collaborative projects. So the limit of what I've done in the book are really related to this idea of not being able to perhaps intervene at the level of the software. And I'm thinking about the fast phase cycling technology. And I think that's very difficult to do unless one has a profound knowledge of the physics behind it. So I try to find ways in which researchers in the humanities, in the arts and the humanities, would not be put off by a lack of technical and in-depth expertise that sometimes not even physicists working in another field or other scientists have. So I think my idea of de-black boxing is very much is quite democratic, if you want. It's quite easy to perform. And I think it's still important because it does show the importance of the arts and the humanities and of history as well. History, for me, it's very important. I think it is, I'm not a historian, but the history, like knowing the history related to the development of a certain technology is crucial. And in this respect, I just want to end with citing a passage that comes actually from an article by Orit Halpern, who is really one of the key theorists actually behind, working on data, cognition, etc. And she says, and I use her work also in my book, she said that, and I'm quoting, "Our current focus on built or existing technologies ignores questions of desire, aspiration, epistemology, and imagination that exist before and often outside of specific material instantiations in built objects," end quote. And I feel that this is, there's no use of the term black box, but I think this is for me what the black boxing might be. I stop here.
Should we first give you the pop, and then I will ask the question? I would.
Hara, maybe you feel like.
Yeah, actually, yeah, indeed, it is maybe not a term that we relate with, or at least not explicitly. Although, of course, we. Or at least I speak personally, was impacted by its appearance, no, like in STS, no, and like the importance of this combination of naturalization processes and also optimization processes, because I think what's interesting about one of the interesting things of this metaphor is the combination of both, no, how this erasure of what's between the input and the output comes through a process of optimization or sophistication, no, of a technique. So, and in that sense, it's very interesting what you brought, Sylvia, the not yet standard, this category of the not yet standard, which actually can be practiced through different techniques. No, it can be reached through the technique of, I don't know, reverse engineering, no, but also of reverse speculation as well, no? And this is where the imagination that you just mentioned also enters the room or the box. So in that sense, for sure, some of our attempts in the writing, but also in the very praxis, have to do with that. And maybe this is also why we are using this mode of research, this term to define our mode of research, which is disobedient action research. And it is in that action part where perhaps the reverse invention or the cracking open tries to take place, but staying close to direct action. And this means understanding very well, like, the very potentialities that lie within the technologies and the techniques and the protocols and the standards and the specific technologies. For example, in behind a software which is open source, which is sourced by a big distributed community of agents involved, there are protocols like bug reporting or feature requests that might provide with an entry point to the so-called black box of software, without the need to do the complete reverse engineering of it. So it also implies like detecting the backdoors, and I think in that sense it's very interesting to detect those backdoors because of some urgencies that sometimes the research on transfeminist technosciences implies. No, like sometimes we're in a hurry because there is some important damage taking place. So boxes come in many forms and shapes and flavors, and sometimes they have to do with temporalities. Sometimes they have to do with how indexes are constructed and how matter is indexed, and sometimes they have to do with the inheritance, like cultural inheritance of mathematics, for example, no. Or with assumptions of the individual, no, like these are also coming in, if we want to use them, black boxed forms. Yeah.
Can I just because I think like one
please.
of the just from our work, because I think there's one thing I thought Sylvia, when you talk about stopping at some point, or stopping the opening of the box because of technical abilities. I think what we try to insist on is that lack of technical knowledge can sometimes be a big advantage, because, and this is a bit of the danger of the metaphor of the black box, is that if you would be able to open it, you would actually be able to see what's in there. And this is also, it's a bit false. It's a kind of like a carrot in front of us that suggests that if we would make enough effort or have enough skills or have enough knowledge, we would be able to open that box and then know what's going on. But actually, we already know what's going on. So sometimes it's not so much about opening the black box, but experiencing it, or like as Gara says, finding the back doors, working with it, sensing its presence and its working. That is a way to deal with what technology does. So it's not always about understanding how it actually works. It's one way of understanding what it does, but for us, I think in our work, it's more about understanding what it does than how it works. And yeah.
Would that mean, for example, or could one then say that part of de-blackboxing would be also to actually find a different term? So not talk about it as it is a black box that needs to get deboxed.
I mean, I think the problem is the promise in it, and I think and this is why we speak about regimes, why we speak about continuums. Those are not like demarcated boxes. I mean, because once you open the box, there's another box. I mean, these are endless matryoshkas of technologies that are woven into each other. So in order to come to terms with that and to find some activist approach to them, that term is not, for us, not so useful, I think, and that's the reason why we're not, I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't want to engage with those technologies.
Yeah.
So this is where it's very nice you bring the Halpern quote, Sylvia. Thank you.
Flora, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I also wondered, it's indeed a term that has so many different definitions, or it's laden. Also, it has a history. Really, the black box as a term comes from cybernetics research, where it had a specific role to be able to look at inputs and outputs. So it was a necessary. It was also an epistemological move. Not so much we might not understand what's in the box, but also we're interested in looking at inputs and outputs, and we have to stabilize an element of a certain configuration in order to continue with our research. And then there's Latour using blackboxing in his ethnographic observations. And then there's a sort of third moment where I feel the black box is now returning as a term a lot when we were discussing artificial intelligence, for example, where it is actually often, I feel, indeed used as, the danger and something that needs to be, we need to be wary of. And I like your observation, Femke, that it's maybe a term that can also function as a red herring, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, of course, especially when we think about machine learning, where often the technologists, the very skilled technologists that work with these technologies themselves, have no way of opening that box. So the question then is, how do you critically engage with those technologies without needing first to know how it works? How do you do that? And this is some of the uncertainties and probabilities that are starting to operate.
Yeah, but it also points to the limits of, the limits of the promise of of knowing as a way for liberation.
Exactly.
Like because there is like this is really part of like the modern paradigm of if we know, if we manage
only
to
we know.
see and name and detect and have at hand, sorry for all the ableist terms that come with that, but I mean, just want to say, to make this point, like it comes with a legacy also of putting knowledge on front for transformation, for processes of potential transformation and liberation of a number of oppressions, while it might not be only related to knowing, and in the metaphor of black boxing, of seeing as knowing, but it might be also time to consider harder processes or different processes, like, for example, the abolition of such regimes. Just to leave it in the air. Of course, it's very interesting, the kind of conversation that this very term already activated, and in that sense, it is absolutely valuable. But at the same time, it signals to its own limits. Or limitations, and it signals to the very like regime that it somehow like belongs to, which is like the regime that still keeps reifying knowledge somehow, like as a way for transformation, sorry.
Yeah, that relates. Maybe I had just had the feeling, for example, Sylvia, when you were describing that this deep black boxing is the easiest or is more approachable at the beginning, or when the technology is not yet standardized, normalized, etc. And I was then wondering for myself if that would mean that you consider black boxing as unavoidable. So almost is, yeah, which is related to this whole notion that Jara just had about knowing, right? Like if we just knew, then we would be able. So yeah, is it unavoidable, or is this thinking of it already part of the problem? So is the thought that I had already actually as like a trigger for the wrong kind of questions or something? I don't know if I make myself clear. Yeah.
Well, to me, like the activity of black boxing is really what goes on in the lab when scientists are working to, toward the development of a new, in this case, type of biomedical imaging technology. And to me, it is still a useful term. And it's not necessarily related only to the idea of having the ability and the knowledge necessary to understand exactly what's going on and to reach the ground, so to say, like this kind of mythical ground that is like the grounding for all activities, etc. But I think it is an attempt to move away from focusing only on the kind of on the images or on certain aspects of the technology into question. And this is why, and I think like in the book, I do make the effort to actually stay away from the idea that, it's all about knowledge or all about a certain type of knowledge. I really foreground all the kind of dimensions of, craftsmanship, subjectivity that actually are already at work in the laboratory, but these are silenced. Let's not use the term black box, but they are silenced. If one looks, for instance, only at the kind of published outputs written by physicists in my case. So I was interested in, and this is why archival research, for instance, or working, paying attention to the, if you want, to the paratextual elements that scientists themselves use when they construct a narrative also around, their, the history of their laboratory, the history of what they are doing, etc., is quite important. And these are instances in which we can actually dismantle this idea of also the single origin of a technology. So I do feel that in the book I stay very much away from a kind of like a conventional understanding of the black box. Then using the term black box is still useful if one wants to appeal to the community of STS scholars to some extent. So I did try, and it is, at the end of the day, we all create, or we use certain words that are already existing, or we also create other words that are, that might actually talk about the same things. So I do feel that for me it was still important to really use the term, because otherwise the attention would be only on, the final visual output, on the image, or on the idea that, that we need to focus a lot on I don't know, on the scan, the final result. So yeah, I would love to hear from others, quite honestly, as well.
Mm. Yeah, any comments or follow-up questions from the rest, from the others? Yeah, otherwise I just get a sign from our timekeeper, because that we should maybe continue with the second block about the futures of biomedical imaging and the urgencies for the queer cut. And we thought it would be maybe interesting to talk about the futures already now, and not at a so-called straightforward logical end of the conversation. And Sylvia, you write about the emergence of precision and predictive medicine, and how this is influencing people's health in this shift from the transparent molar body to the potential molecular one, and which you also see this new or rediscovered technique of FFC MRI entangled in. And we will, in the next block, discuss then also this close connection between predictive medicine, uncertainty in image, graph interpretation, and so on. And Femke and Jara, you quote actually Catherine Hiles at the end of your article, saying, "Only if one thinks of the subject as an autonomous self, independent of the environment, is one likely to experience the panic of Norbert Wiener's cybernetics and Bernard Wolf's limbo. When the human is seen as part of a distributed system, it is not a question of leaving the body behind, but rather of extending embodied awareness in highly specific, local, and material ways that would be impossible without electronic prostheses." So I wanted to, we would like to ask you, what are your worries or your hopes also for biomedical imaging within this current reality of living? What do you think needs to be done, and how to trigger or enable a change that you might hope for? Jara and Femke, if you try to give this outlook, you tried to give this outlook actually at the end of your text in form of a transfeminist feature request, I would say. And Sylvia, you explored, for example, FFC MRI graphs as that are rather numbers than images. And I was wondering, for example, if this could help us in this not yet closed black box, to recalibrate also our ways of looking at it. So how this strangeness of the graph of the FFC MRI could open up the viewer to other kinds of seeing or recognition. It's a big blob. I don't know, want to go to... Yes, this is the future. I don't know who wants, maybe Sylvia first, is it? Or
Oh, let's you know, give the
Maybe
word.
Gara can
I started before.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yes. So Femke or Gara, do you feel like?
I can say that the last sentence of the article is a question about responsible imagery, and I think that's what, like, yeah, we play with some of the possible futures of imaging, I'd say, but this idea that the imagery would not be an end point, but somehow would be interfaces to whatever, like those technologies and presences that they bring together, and that would be something interesting. So that would mean to fundamentally assume their possibleness, like the fact that they are about possibilities rather than about final outcomes or evidence, or so to assume their ability to produce realities in every direction, and how that would work concretely, I mean, that's to experiment with, but yeah, I think the responsible image, I think that's where I would like to start.
Yeah, maybe just as an addition to that, because now that you opened the agential cut, no, somehow you brought it straight away. I think it's important to just like go back to the why we're speaking about queer cuts, and it's not a matter of identity at all. it's not that kind of use of the notion of queer. It's more like to point at the fact that biomedical practices are still functioning under the realm of patriarchal colonial capitalism. So it's like all the industrial complex that contributes to the research is nurtured by a very specific ideology that limits that defines life itself, or what lives deserve to be lived, which others don't. So, and in that sense, we are trying to speak about the urgencies for queer cuts, and I think Sylvia, it's very interesting how you were, like, before, like when we were preparing, asking us about like how to still, even with that complexity, how to still trust or need some efficiency, for example, no, like for some visual efficiency for the praxis, let's say like the mundane praxis of medicine, no, in the biomedical, no, like with like understand, and this is how I understood it, no, with the goodwill of healing people, basically, no, but it's I want to say that our imaginations towards the futures of biomedical images is not a challenge to that goodwill of healing, but more a challenge to the very like regime that defines what is pathological, what counts in as a valid somatic entity, no, and also if you want like more socioeconomical configurations, no, what gets funded, what and why, no, what kind of machinery gets funded and enters the circuit of like towards blackboxing, no, to take that conversation from before again. Yeah, many other things, but just to say that for now.
I think that's very, very interesting. I mean, to me, when because my attempt was to kind of try to work around the different type of visualizing data that were present in these two periods of MRI development in this specific laboratory. And when I started to investigate this new biomedical imaging technology, fast field cycling MRI, which I'm not going into the details, but it's a new type of technique that works by switching the magnetic field, and it is at low field. So it does go really against this idea that the only way possible to develop biomedical imaging is to work at increasingly high field and to produce increasingly crisp and to some extent even beautiful images, very of high resolution. Fast field cycling doesn't produce high resolution images. Contrast is much more important. Let me also be clear that, and in the book, I do explain that the graphs that are the kind of visual output, if you want, produced by fast field cycling are looked at by physicists. But when these graphs are actually passed on to radiologists, for in the attempt to transform this technology into something that has clinical potential, they need to be transformed into an image, into a type of scan that we are used to, like the kind of with MRI or other biomedical imaging technology. So it has this kind of double, this double, belonging. And I think it's quite important because I think it is important to recall that MRI did not born into like a visual culture, and the same goes for fast field cycling MRI. And I think this is too often taken for granted. But going back to but maybe this is something that we can tackle later on in the conversation. But going back to the question of what these profiles and the shapes of these profiles actually depict, what they reveal, what kind of information they have. Well, this is very much still an ongoing question, and what was interesting for me is that in the fast field cycling technology, because it's not a structural type of biomedical imaging, it kind of blends structure with functional information, because it does give access to the behaviors really of at molecular level. So it is inserted into this kind of wider paradigm of predictive medicine. And I think this is, and personalized and predictive medicine. So, and I think this is where it gets quite interesting to some extent, because it is a technology that it's part of a series of other technologies that are not necessarily image-based, that are trying to find biomarkers for detecting not the presence of a disease, but to some extent either the early stages of its development or even the possibility that it will become a disease. So, and this is the kind of also the potential of fast field cycling, the fact that it does reveal information not accessible to conventional MRI scanners, but this is also where the discourse becomes also problematic for me. The idea that the kind of the paradigm into which this new type of technology, which is also much cheaper than conventional MRI, and this is quite important, it is inserted in this kind of paradigm of predictive medicine with all the consequences that we can discuss, obviously. So I'm not sure whether I should go on, because I feel that maybe someone else would like to intervene.
But it's very interesting what you're saying, because it's actually you're speaking from a present of the not yet standard of this technology, no predictive, like this predictive technology is still in the condition of the like towards implementation, no, like full implementation.
Yeah, I mean, this technology has not been commercialized yet. So this is also why, I mean, it's developed in-house, literally from scratch, from bits and pieces of existing technologies. And this is why, you know, where also this dimension of craftsmanship comes into play. But at the end of the day, it is inserted very much fully into this kind of paradigm of risk technologies, other risk technologies. And it's quite interesting that in order to receive funding, it needed to be also the promise that the physicists needed to make was that it could reveal information, useful information for neurodegenerative diseases, because this is where the money goes, together with, you know, cancer research, but, you know, research and the possibility of finding new biomarkers for neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer, etc., made possible for this technology to receive also big funding. So and for me, predictive medicine, I'm, you know, it's really part of this idea of seeking to control all the kind of range of uncertainties that the patient might face or might not face. And this is where, you know, also the kind of entanglement between, you know, biomedical imaging technologies that are based on quantum physics and the idea of actually governance comes into play. But this is maybe for another.
It's very much a population view, no, of the molar body through the molecular. You get a statistical view rather than.
I was just, when you described this this shift from the graph that is actually for the physicist, and then but the radiologist needs then the image, I was just thinking of if we also consider then the radiologist as the scapegoat, because you hear this notion also when it comes to MRI, right, that they are so used to X-rays, and that's why MRI looks like X-rays. So they, and I really wonder, I mean, either that's really the case, they are as inflexible as
radiologists,
radiologist, as if they are pictured, and that would mean we actually would need workshops about responsible imaging specifically for them, so that they actually would be fine working also with these graphs, right? As a biomarker, as potential biomarker information in regards to the patient. And I wonder if that's not also, maybe the radiologist will be completely fine, but in this commercialization step, there is an anticipation of them, for them, that they want these images. I mean, it's just I'm just wondering about, if that, for whom do we need workshops, basically, also? Yeah.
I think, in my view, and then I'm happy to leave the word to others, but in my view, yes. I mean, part of the reason why radiologists were, keen on, on receiving not only images but also black and white images is that because they were used to read X-rays. So that's whereas physicists only need the numbers, they don't need the image to some extent. But this is not. I mean, it's interesting again that this is part of also the kind of the convention and the friction present within also the history of, for instance, MRI. The idea of deciding at some point to turn MR nuclear magnetic resonance into magnetic resonance imaging. But the idea of developing images is closely connected to the idea of actually transforming a technology, biomedical imaging technology, from a purely research tool to a clinical tool with diagnostic potential. And this is where, so to some extent, to me, it is as if when the body of the patient comes into the picture, even before, you know, clinical trials commence, so that then we kind of switch to the image. But it would be interesting to find other ways of you know, making those data meaningful and useful for developing a diagnosis. And this is, I think, a challenge. It's also interesting that when it comes to defining what an image of quality is, there are different, you know, answers depending on whether you ask a radiologist, a clinician, a molecular biologist, a physicist, etc. So, but I think, yes, running workshops for although do remember that, I mean, they don't have time.
No, who has time?
I had
But
I had the feeling that when we started this block about the urgency of queer cuts, that in the text by Femke and Gara, that you end the text with a proposal, with what I would call a kind of subversion of existing technology. And I wonder, Sylvia, if you would say that in your book, artists, the artists that you work with, that you observe, also offer perhaps a subversion of some of those tendencies that you see happening with the predictive medicine that you focus in on towards the end of that first part of the book.
Absolutely. Like in the last chapter, when I discussed, for instance, the work of I don't know, Ilona Segar, for instance, I do try to kind of present some. I'm not saying even examples, because it would really be to reduce the really the depth of the artist's work that I discuss in the book. But I do try to show how artists are actually actively resisting this framework, and how they are actually much more self-aware of the wider context into which these technologies are actually placed. And this is why I feel collaborative work is so crucial. I mean, it's not easy, because at the end of the day, these technologies are also important for, I mean, they do save lives. So this is my kind of, it's not easy to kind of criticize the paradigm and at the same time not throw away a new technology that, for instance, costs less, that potentially could be used in countries that are not in the West, that cannot afford conventional MRI scanners, etc. So I don't know. I would like to hear from artists, though. I don't think, you know, otherwise I'm going to talk about, yes, the artist, but maybe either, well, there's Lise Orton, whose work I discussed in the book, who I think does amazing work in reasoning around and the medical image and also the idea of replacing the patient with an image, which is at the end of the day what goes on also with to some extent with predictive medicine when it's used for patients suffering from neurodegenerative diseases, patients who sometimes cannot even communicate how they feel, what their condition is. So all these biomarkers are actually replacing them, not just visual biomarkers, obviously. So I think this is where the work of artists is actually quite interesting, like trying to give also the patients a voice and the body back. I don't know, but I'm not going to talk on
No,
behalf.
this is the hard part, of course, where like whenever you talk to someone about this critique, especially when they have been through surgery involving MRI, etc., you always come up to this point. But if we zoom out a little bit, we also know that the modern slice kills as well. Like the paradigms that are being established, confirmed in these types of understandings of where knowledge is and how the human body works, where it begins and where it ends, are also part of a paradigm that is a mass killer. So I think we have to also be careful with our carefulness with critique on these kinds of techniques that are life-saving in the clinic, but might, in their confirmation of regimes that are killing in other spaces, might be in urgent need of critique. So I think this is where, again, like for us, the queer cuts are super important. Also, I have no illusion that our critique will destabilize this billion-dollar industry, and that I mean, there's nothing we can make it shake with. So even more, I think it's important to try and hold on to those questions that we're asking, because I think they're part of a much larger regime that is murderous, I think. So, not to, as Gara already said, like not to confuse our care for those individuals that are undergoing treatment with the urgent need of a critique of a regime that is super problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to this observation, of course, there's like this like the counter side of those those life-saving devices, no, which are also life-ending devices. But I think it helps us to problematize like life as a category of analysis only, no, like in this kind of conversations, and we are in the on the moment in the afternoon in which we are asked to speak about the futures, no, of biomedical images, and I think this kind of questions that widen a bit like the categories are super useful for that, like imaginations towards like what potential futures might be, or what widening of the possible, no, if you want, and I think if we understand life as a para-individual phenomenon, which it is it's like it is really a political fiction to speak about lives that are saved or not, only located within the very sharply limited oneness of humanness, no? So if we understand that like that, there are a number of technoscientific operations that are like super interesting here. For example, you're speaking about data sets in your research, and the transversality of the reading of those data sets. So I think it would be interesting to wonder if we understand life as a para-individual phenomenon, it would be super interesting to have a conversation about the publicness of that data, no, for predictability, and how is it made public or not, or how does it circulate, and how transversality works through those data sets, in order to maybe not always make the cut in the same borders of the patient, but in other places, like how to use this mode of computational functioning to widen the very categories that seem to be like so rigidly set in our understanding of the values of the technologies themselves, like the value of saving lives.
Yes, and maybe on this notion we could continue with the third block.
Thank you for this agential.
About the 4 P's of uncertainty: the predictive, the potential, the probable, and the possible. And we had the feeling like these terms in a different mix, in a different overlap, are important in both texts. We had the feeling that these terms sometimes seem to be used as almost as if they are interchangeable, and we were wondering if that's really the case. So we wanted to invite you also to discuss these terms also with a closer look to the terminology, or to the concepts they are like embedded in or used with. And I will start again with some quotes. So Sylvia, you wrote that FFC MRI, in a similar fashion to other risk technologies in the world of healthcare, has a specific relationship with the present and future dimension when it comes to how they manage uncertainty. So manage uncertainty and enable the calculation of risk probabilities to make predictions. You connect this, of course, to this shift where the body ceases to be a transparent organism, becoming instead an ensemble of molecules. And we were wondering if one should actually I was actually wondering if we should rather say that the myth of transparency is superseded by the myth of predictability and potentiality. But maybe what is even more pressing is that I personally had difficulties to understand how FFC MRI is then so much more predictive than normal MRI, or what is the otherness of FFC MRI in this realm of adding to uncertainty or not, or adding to becoming a biomarker or not, or helping than normal MRI already does. So I have really kind of an understanding problem there, and I was wondering if you could maybe discuss this. And maybe if I could ask one more quote just to round this up. You also wrote whether it is stochastic uncertainty, model uncertainty, or uncertainty about the future, finding ways to convey uncertainty is one of the most important challenges in data visualization today. And I was wondering what your relationship to uncertainty is, and how you would evaluate or judge uncertainty in the field of bioimaging. I also have some things then to say about you, but maybe we give first. No. The text just gets too long otherwise, I think. Sylvia, could I give you the podium?
Yeah. Well, fast-paced cycling again does because it uses a range of the magnetic field that has been neglected by conventional MRI, so it doesn't work at high field. It does reveal information. It does engage with the dynamics of water molecules in a way that structural MRI does not engage with. It does reveal information that is related to this parameter that is called the dispersion curve, that is made visible in these graphs, that is not really made visible in conventional MRI scanners. And this is the hope. Let's not forget this is a technology that is still under development. So the promise of this technology and what they are really starting to see with the clinical trials that they have started to carry out is that it does enable to look at not at the disease directly, as I said before, but at the behaviors, let's say, of molecules, but in such a way that it might reveal useful information that enables clinicians to understand that a disease is there even before it becomes detectable by other biomedical imaging technologies or by other techniques, including MRI. And in this sense, it sits between structure and function. It's not limited to revealing the structure of organs, and it's not. It does engage much more than conventional MRI with the body at the molecular scale. When it comes to the terminology, I think that you do highlight a problem that I also encountered, in the sense that there's a lot of like in the literature around medical anthropology, for instance, sometimes the terms possibility, potentiality are used interchangeably. So it's not always easy to come to a definition. To me, the word potential has, if you pass me the expression, maybe a more positive meaning than the word prediction, because to some extent, the word prediction to me and brings in the idea that with these technologies, we are defining and writing the contours of what is possible to do in relation to finding out about a future disease, or whereas potentiality might open up a space for imagination, maybe in the technical sense that my colleagues so well described and put at work in their book. Like the word probability is obviously quite linked to quantum mechanics, and to discuss functional MRI, but also MRI without discussing quantum mechanics is quite hard. And so, again, probability for me has to do with has to do with the idea of calculation and the possibility to conduct calculations of risks to make a prediction. Okay. Whereas potentiality, again, to me, leaves space for another type of intervention that is also not necessarily related to the strictly biomedical field. I'm not sure whether the two can coexist, but this is how I understand these two terms, at least. And obviously, like the main difference is between also like evidence-based evidence medicine and predictive medicine. So these two different regimes of seeing, one very much connected to the idea of being able to record symptoms that are visible, and that to carry out a diagnosis also by means of vision. And in the case of predictive medicine, vision, or the act of seeing, is really accompanied by the use of statistics and, again, variables, probability, and etc. So probability is really like the mathematical distillation of all the possible outcomes, if you want, into maybe a number, given a certain set of variables, given a certain data set. And I find that in like, at least in predictive medicine, all these kind of concepts of, probability, risk, and potentiality are intertwined. They also are a little bit of buzzwords, obviously. Sometimes they are used in bids just to, to attract, again, more funding. But I would say that for me, the idea is that prediction has to do with the idea of extraction, being able to extract information for instance, from an image, from a graph, in order to govern and make decisions in relation to the treatment of a patient, or decisions in terms of, yes, a therapeutic treatment, etc. Whereas potentiality, for me, the potential is less mathematical or statistical, probably charged, although I'm probably wrong, but this is how I guess that in the book I was trying to find a way of really liberating the category of potential from the idea of being always related to probability. I don't know if I explain myself.
Maybe just one comment before I then would like to, I'm just wondering, when one talks about the possible or the potential of precision and predictive medicine, a medicine that actually asks for kind of a standardization and normalization of a body, if that's not also a false promise in this sense, because it might not do or it actually does not do justice to a lot of other bodies that don't fit these categories. But this just as a term, maybe we can go, or like a note, we can maybe go back to. But in relation to the possible, maybe Chara and Femke, you don't use the term like uncertainty or that you're working with, but you wrote, the possible is not about a fantastical widening of the imagination, but it is a technical condition that is already happening. This is a fundamental political twist in cultural analysis and critique of what imagination is. It is actually a technical thing. So I wonder if you could maybe elaborate on how the possible is different is potentially different from the potential, and what the relationship maybe of the possible with uncertainty has, or if it's simply ignoring it out of disinterest.
Or maybe, should we try to, should we start with explaining how we use, is the sound okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The tension between the possible and the probable, because that's, like, for us, we have really made that distinction as a way to talk about the way that the probable often figures in computational environments. Like it pretends or it promises the possible, but it's often the probable, as in keeping the outcomes that could happen within fixed borders, even when these fixed borders are wider than we can imagine or have many different variables of outcomes. And this is the type of work we try to do on biomedical imaging and Slicer, the software that we have been studying, is to try to see how what spaces, what is possible in these spaces already, or what gets disguised as through the probable. I don't know, Chara, do you want to?
Yeah, and sorry, just to connect with like how the question was posed, which I found very beautiful, is that we try to think of this tension between the probable and the possible in terms of conditions, like how like the very like material conditions, and or we say semiotic conditions and material conditions. So semiotic material conditions are arranged towards the repetition and reproduction of the very probable, or are arranged towards a potential widening of the possible. And they are like these material conditions are fabricated, they are constructed, they are like they are based on a number of technical apparatuses and decisions, and in that sense they connect very much with the notion of responsibility that Femke brought before, because very often there is like a delegation on only technical matters of that responsibility, like there is a delegation on software, there is a delegation on hardware of the conditions of possibility. No, if this is possible to do or not, if this is possible to see or not, but it's not so often that we get to have a conversation about how these semiotic and material conditions are set towards possibility and not towards probability. And it is really an industrial conversation, or it's a conversation that needs to take place with agents that have like the hands on like really established matters, no? Like in the very like paradigms, let's say. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
I mean, what we tried to do in this last paragraph is somehow talk about like often the possible is placed outside of what is already there. Like, so imagination is something for later, for when we have time, for those that have artistic skills, for moments that are not about efficiency. And what we realized with this work is that the possible is always already there. It's not something that is, it can actually be quite mundane, about small shifts of how means are put to use that can open up radically different approaches to what a body is, what living is or not, how you name something. All these kind of things are about, I would almost say, like shifts between whether something gets constrained by probability, what probably will happen, and what maybe might happen. And these are like really like small shifts that are not about like gigantic supercomputers that need to be put in place to make something happen, that like to make the possible happen. It is by how you keep looking at what's in front of you for where it follows the convenient route of the probable, or where it might take a backdoor of the possible.
Could we try and figure this out in an example? Like, I'm wondering when I think about Sylvia's work and the FFC MRI and neurodegenerative diseases, I had to think of this risk profiling of Alzheimer's, for example, and this idea that women might be more at risk for Alzheimer's. So we're creating a category, creating a new type of human, namely the woman at risk of Alzheimer's. And I wonder, like, so in your phrasing, what would the possible allow us to think otherwise, rather than the woman at risk, or the possibility, the probability of her developing Alzheimer's, for example?
Yeah. I mean, again, like the. Oh, sorry, Sylvia.
Maybe this is a very kind of shallow way.
No,
but I'm
no,
just
no,
trying to kind of.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. You want to respond to that, Sylvia?
As you want.
No, please. That would be very.
No. I don't think I have an answer to some extent, but I do think that you. Because I don't have a suggestion to some extent, but I do think that it's. Perhaps I would say that one would maybe instead of talking about the profiling, when it comes to the information that one can extract from the curves of these graphs of fast-phase cycling, what one could really like focus on how to live with the uncertainty of whether or not one would develop a disease, like to embrace almost the uncertainty.
Yes.
Like, because to me, uncertainty again is I mean, I'm interested in ways in which artists can actually help us, but not only artists, also scientists. In the book, I try to show how also physicists, maybe in their laboratory actually in their personal notebooks, can make these kind of small steps that you mentioned before and suggest ways in which this kind of dimension of the possible, of the uncertain, of really the struggle with the material, with the techniques, is actually embraced rather than governed by, you know, this kind of big paradigm. So I was very interested in really in the agential cuts as ways in which also we can think about another scale for really discussing these problems and finding ways of intervening at different scales, molar, maybe also molecular, infrastructural, or, you know, at the level of scaffolding, so to say. But I would say embrace the uncertainty maybe rather than, you know, being identified with a profile that is a clinical profile, and then an identity profile, or you even get stripped away from your, so to say, identity, because with the neurodegenerative disease, very often the literature says that you don't have your own identity anymore. You are someone else. You become someone else, which is quite horrific. I think it's a very violent way of, you know, approaching the condition of having
identity to begin with. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, like I was struck by like the moments you mentioned, experiment, and also the wonderful moment of understanding that the observations that the scientists are making are the result of so many different factors that it's actually almost impossible to know what is happening, which I think is really interesting, and in many observations we do, we have actually no clue. I mean, one thing I was like is maybe almost on the level of language, like where you understand through your work in the lab that there's this attempt to bind the FFC MRI observations, like on molecular level to the molar level of the body as we know it, because of course, to kind of co-confirm. And so it's all the time this language around how one observation will confirm the other observation. But actually it's a very interesting, if you start to imagine that these are not so much about confirming of like aligning with each other, but how they start to vibrate each other and how it start to question actually what is a body, what is a molar body, what is a molecular body, what body are we looking at when we're looking at the molecule itself, what does it mean to touch it or not. Your question about fingerprint, I'm thinking about Murat talking about touch as the repulsion. I mean, all these kinds of questions start to really enrich the possibilities of what's happening between two different types of, I would say, both visualizations maybe, or picturings, as some people would say, and how they could cross-excite each other, to talk with MRI like language. Like for who hasn't followed this, all this technique is about the excitement of atoms, which is a very nice to remember and not forget, because this is quite beautiful.
If there's no questions also from the audience, maybe.
Yeah, are there questions from the audience?
Comment.
Maybe?
Also, what kind
And you want to?
No, these are more the quotes that or did I?
But Ryan wrote what kind of body is desirable as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important point. It also comes up at the level of design of these kind of complex machineries, which is also an interesting part of whenever we kind of discuss about the body and you know, the kind of normative body that is imaged or imagined, actually not just imaged, even at the level of, you know, the early stages of building a new prototype. It's quite interesting that at least in my very limited experience, in my very limited ethnographic laboratory fieldwork, I really realized how the reference body is a normative body of a certain shape, size, weight, and it does clash when, like, with the richness of you know, the different bodies when clinical trials start. And it's kind of interesting that this this way in which the body is anticipated is actually does open another set of problems, and I think we should also I think we would need also to bring in design really when we talk about these technologies to some extent, because the really all the kind of, and maybe the idea of work like these agential cuts might, I wonder whether they might envisage also at the level of really design of these machines, even before intervening at the level of the slicing of the digital organization of the body of the patient or of the experimental subject. So
it's interesting that Antje, who's been very, very precisely reading this text that Jeremy wrote, at some point said, but I never came across an MRI machine that was vertical. And it was actually a mistake we made in the text. I don't know if anyone noticed, but because we switched horizontal and vertical at some point. But this is a very interesting idea already, like to think about the relationship between, like, for me it's always so painful to see the position of the patient being pushed through the tunnel of the scanner. Like even that, if that could change, that would be quite wonderful.
And yeah, maybe on this notion of physicality, also of the research, yeah, maybe we could like open the chapter of the last block, which we called Doing and Writing Research. And we were specifically, I mean, Femke, you just mentioned also Sylvia's text with this, like this super rich assemblage of all these different layers and agents. You and Jara, what you do, you call collaborative disobedient action research. And I know that workshops are like an important tool, research tool, or that's how I consider, yeah. It seems, okay, I should say, it seems as if workshops are an important research tool. And you saw, Sylvia, you are very adamant also about this. Yeah, you bring to the foreground the role of human agency in producing, interpreting, displaying data, that then it emerges that data are already aesthetic laden and effective inside the laboratory. And you say that aesthetics, bricolage, and affective investment are part of the situated material conditions of knowledge production that have been considered peripheral to science and that scholars and artists alike can bring to the foreground. And on this notion, I'm very curious actually to hear from you a bit more about how, what is the materiality, the physicality of your research, or the physicality of your methodologies, and also how is this then, how emerges also in the writing research, like writing research. Should I? Who wants?
Well, maybe I can just start with some like a couple of of things. Well, for us in this concrete project, because it started very tentatively, and we were just like very shyly relating to a very big question, which is what is going on with 3D. We needed to start a collection of cases of cultural evidences. It ended up not being so much a collection, neither so much an archive, but more of an inventory, because we wanted some device that, even if it belongs to the modern history of commerce, it allowed us to have like some items at hand that helped us keep complexity open and not to calibrate with any specific lens, no, or like analytic lens. So we started inventorying, and here I can paste the URL. We started the inventory online from the very early days, and this continued. Like then, like when we decided to turn it into a book, we still wanted to be like accessible from the beginning. So we started compiling the book itself on a wiki, and the wiki itself is like a very different device, but it provided with different manners and modes, but it maybe the most important thing is that it speaks about our need to keep the conversation open and to do like constant interlocution with others, with agents whose sensibilities and contexts are very diverse to ours, or different to ours. So constant interlocution is another fundamental aspect of our making, no, of research. And perhaps there is a third one that I can think of, which is, of course, apart from the hands-on at specific like technologies, like softwares, like for example in this text you saw a little bit how we went into the apparatus of Slicer, no, in order to understand its behaviors and also its nuances. To some extent, but also we try to work with language as a very important tool, like not tool, but like an element that actually produces worlds, no? Mm-hmm. So we every time we say body, we actually say so-called body. Mm-hmm. No, like we went for like the inclusion of this extra element to put in suspension the assumption of it being like a closed category. Mm-hmm. So languaging, hands-on with some specific apparatuses, inventorying, and interlocuting. Mm-hmm. I think those could be like some.
To just make
others,
just to make the bridge to workshops. I mean, yes, there have been workshops, but more in the sense of these interlocutions, mm-hmm. to find people to, I don't know, together start looking at softwares for plate, tectonic plate mm-hmm. modeling or things like that. But maybe one like very simple device we've used a lot is the guided tour. Ourselves or others, we've been asking to pick elements from the inventory and to spin stories from them as a way to, and so some items from the inventory have been picked up many times. Others have been left alone. Some we have worked with ourselves a lot. Others have been really useful for people that we invited to work with. So, yeah, the guided tour is maybe more central than the workshop, I would say.
Okay. Yeah.
How does a guided tour work?
Sorry?
What does a guided tour look like?
It can be different things. We've done ourselves like performative readings where we mix like software manuals with theoretical text by others and text by ourselves with imagery. That's one way. So the items all have numbers, and so we just play with like item number, and that becomes then also an alternative form of referencing. So because we really felt like, I mean, we were laughing when we were introducing ourselves to each other, that Sylvia wrote the book that we wished that was there when we were writing this book, both ways. But we often felt like the theoretical references we had were not enough as a referencing field. So we kind of built our own frame of reference that we could use to say, okay, this is like the hairy hominid effect, for example. So we were just basically inventing concepts and imagery and referencing to be able to figure out what on earth is going on with 3D.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've done that very, very beautifully and effectively, and I love the idea of a guided tour, also through the like in the guise of the Andrea Fraser, like that type of. I mean, my own. I think my role was very limited when it comes to the hands-on aspect. My kind of engagement with the materiality of these things and the materiality also of the concepts, and then I addressed in the book, was very much carried out during the laboratory ethnography, and I did try to really just create space for listening and observing. I wasn't allowed to do anything in the lab, practically speaking, obviously. So that's like the power dynamic was extremely unbalanced. I was also the only female in a group of male physicists. So not only not a physicist, but also yeah, so it took an awful lot of time to be trusted, really, to gain their trust and to gain access, I would say, to the lab. And I tried to establish, I would say, also personal connections with some of the actors who had a role in for instance, in the early phase of MRI development in Aberdeen, who had been neglected and marginalized by the official history of MRI invention and development, not just in Aberdeen, but also elsewhere. So I tried also in my, I felt that I needed to use quite an essayistic style, in at least in parts of the book, to really try to highlight this very tentative way and journey that I enacted, and also this very personal connection that I built with certain actors that appear in the book. So for me, it was really like I would say that for me it was important to kind of create the space for letting some of these kind of hidden histories and also objects emerge. Also, for instance, I don't know, scrapped components of the new fast-paced cycling machine that actually belong to old scanners. All this kind of idea of also recycling the material, and at the end of the day, this is also something that physicists embrace, because they certainly didn't start from explaining the physics, but they started by showing again the kind of material objects that they built, like the coil became like the example, and also it also became, if you want, the prop used by the artist in residence to kind of to really create her own installation. And then for me, it's also about the physical engagement with the archival material, like the idea of arranging images and stories and memories, and that comes from, I don't know, the recorded interviews in such a way that they become part of a network that is, and also patchwork. And I felt that this was the only way to actually find a way to think through images. I'm quite frustrated sometimes with work that is too much overimposing theory upon a set of practices. I don't feel that I succeeded, but that was the attempt to kind of try to think through images as much as possible, think through objects, think through things that I encountered in my journey. So that's.
Thank you.
Yes, we need, maybe last round of kind of adding to the vocabulary with terms that might have popped up or stuck with you from the conversation. And maybe I could also start again, because it's actually picking up from what Sylvia just said. So what I would like to add is what Sylvia earlier said, is the need to put away the visual output when researching, dealing with biomedical imaging, which might actually answer my own question that I had when I was reading your book, Sylvia. I was wondering, with this adamant emphasis on assemblage, materiality, the coils, the scribbles, I wanted to see this also in the book. So, I mean, there wasn't, from me as an artist, I really wanted to see then the things you were talking about. But maybe the answer is then something you earlier said. So to not maybe follow the urges to prove or to explain, or leave basically also then me as the reader in this frustration is too much, but you know what, like in this tensionous space by not delivering the imagery. Okay, that was long. Next one.
I think that's part of unfortunately, you know, the amount of images. I felt that the book has more than 70 images, so it's quite a lot of images, but clearly I couldn't possibly publish it with all the images that I took during the fieldwork. And that's a limitation. I completely agree with you. I would say that if one had all the kind of, if one were allowed to actually really, you know, publish open access, that type of visual material before the publication comes into the world, that would be great. I still have all that, like I have tons of images, obviously, that like are, you know, revealing really the step-by-step fieldwork. But yeah, that's a limit of actually a model of publishing, I feel. It's not, it shouldn't be put on the shoulders of the researcher.
Yeah, maybe who's next with adding to the vocabulary list?
Yeah, so maybe, anybody in the chat can just say, oh, you know, this other new word came up in a discussion that I like, or you can also type it in a chat if you more comfortable doing that. I'm still chewing on Orit Halpern's.
On what?
On Orit Halpern's quote that Sylvia used in the book, and she said also now today. So the ignoring of questions of desire, aspiration, epistemology, and imagination that exist before and often outside of specific material instantiations inbuilt objects. Yeah, so I will chew on that a bit more, and also read. Yeah, go back to the part in your book, Sylvia, where you talk about Louisa Moore's work and the way that the uncertain and the probable affects the present, which I am is sort of triggered by our discussion today. Yeah, thank you.
I like picking up on the myth of prediction. That's a good one. I would like to add the myth of the improbable.
Sorry.
I felt that imagination is, I feel that after this discussion, I feel more empowered. And I think this is a great feeling. Like I gain more ideas, and I feel that imagination is within my reach and our reach. And I think that's a great, to me, that's a great, great outcome.
Yeah, nice.
I am with you, Sylvia. I also feel the same.
Should we maybe read?
Ren, do you want to say something about this questions of shared risk? You don't have to, but
no, I don't. Well, I mean, okay, I've been asked to, so I can. I guess I'm just also from earlier in the talk, Sylvia, but I think also Hara and Femke, you think about this as well. Just moving from the individual to a more collective way of understanding engagement with these technologies, like what kinds of dependencies and shared risk that requires, and what imaginations for this are possible or probable. So I would actually like to hear if anyone has something to say about that.
I mean, yeah, I think that's for me the urgency of the critique and the queer cut is because if these technologies are to be healing, then we have to share the risk, not just between us humans, but also with the rest of the planet. So I don't know. So then the question is, of course, how, and there some of the engagements, like then it means to engage with these technologies in ways that allow for, that's why I brought responsible, or allow us to be responsible in the sense of being part of the decisions that are being taken, but also in conversation with, in the sense of responsible. So again, like it's not like we're talking at like like extremely large and modern infused regime. So it's not that this is going to be an easy, quick fix. And I don't think that has to be. But I think to me it's very clear that it's urgent that we share the risk. And then we bring everything we've got to it. Whether that's ethnography, whether that's artistic practice, whether that's activism, or de-blackboxing, whatever it takes for us to share the risk.
Yeah, and maybe a term that Goda is also adding to this, which is the non-innocence, which is very important. I also agree.
Goda.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe we can also wrap this up. Thanks a lot. Thanks specifically for the writers Femke, Hara, and Sylvia, and to all the joining participants of this reading group conversation. Yes, thanks a lot, and last note from...
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the people in the room here, Hamid, Flora, Antje, for preparing this, and of course, companions online. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.